Hello everyone, and welcome back to Occult Perspectives. Glad to have you here. I have a very interesting video for you today. We are going to be getting into the Knights Templar. What's the true history of the Knights Templar? What are they really about? All of these sorts of things. So if you are new to this YouTube channel, what I do on here is I talk about different esoteric research subjects. This includes Freemasonry, Kabbalah, the Tree of Life, the Tree of Death, archangels, demons, all of these sorts of things. We cover all of these different subjects on here. And I kind of try to break them down from my personal experiences. I am a practitioner myself, but I don't practice as often as I used to. And not a lot anymore, but there's still a lot that I've learned from my studies and mostly working with archangels. I've done a lot of archangelic type work. If you are familiar with my YouTube channel, or if you've seen some of my previous material, you'll kind of know where my knowledge base is from. But just also to kind of give you another general idea of who you're getting this information from. So I am somebody who has studied and practiced Western ceremonial magic, such as the lesser rituals of the pentagram, the middle pillar. I was doing the hexagram ritual there for a while, and I've done other practices as well. But just to give you an idea, kind of where I'm at, I wouldn't be quite the neophyte level. I'd be a little bit beyond that, probably like the Zelator. I believe that's the next level, if I remember correctly. So somewhere in there would be kind of where my spiritual development is from more of a purely ritualistic standpoint, or if you're going to follow a curriculum. But I've studied numerous occult texts. I am a Freemason as well. I'm a 32nd Scottish Rite Freemason, and of course a Master Mason in Blue Lodge. I have not joined York Rite yet, so I'm not a Templar. I haven't gone down that path of Freemasonry yet, and that's something that we're going to get into in this video, because I know a lot of people get confused about, are Knights Templar and Freemasons, are they the same thing? Are they different? So we're going to talk about what are some of the differences between the two in this video, and then really kind of how they are one and the same also in this video. So they're not exactly the same thing, but they definitely tie in together. And Freemasonry was kind of born from Templarism. Once we go back into the history of it, and we're going to get into that in just a couple minutes. So this is going to be a longer video. I recommend that you go ahead and crack open your favorite beverage. For me, I stopped by McDonald's this morning and got a hot vanilla latte. If you like vanilla lattes and you've never tried McDonald's, I highly recommend that you try it out, because it's delicious. I'm about to take my first sip. And you know what? They probably could have mixed it up a little bit more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this lid back on, close it up, and stir it up, because sometimes they just don't stir it enough. But if they make it right, they mix it up good enough, it is very yummy. Oh, it's a little bit better. All right. Oh, and for those of you who have been watching my channel and have for a while now, go ahead and check out the new setup that I have going on in here. I've got, I finally have a desk, and there's a Templar plate right there. We'll actually get into that in just a little bit. If you see that light that's right there, actually I noticed that yesterday when I placed that plate just right. There's almost like this energetic doorway, or like door to the temple, which shows up. So I think that's extra neat. We've got the celestial door to the inner sanctum, or the sanctum sanctorum, going on there. Kind of hard to see the pictures that are up on the wall with the glare going on the phone, but those are some Elden Ring pictures. I love Elden Ring. There's a map right there up on the wall of Elden Ring, and then if you look back here towards the bookshelf, which is a mess right now because the books, they come off the shelf every time my son comes over, but there's the Skyrim map too. So then got new bed stuff going on, so it's been a work in progress. So where we're going to start at in this video is, I highly recommend, if any of you are interested in Freemasonry, hopefully that light is not too much for you guys. That doesn't really help, does it? I think it'll be all right. If you're into, studying about the Knights Templar or Freemasonry or anything associated with that, I highly recommend you check out this particular video that I'm going to talk about here, because it actually has the Grand Master of the Knights Templar in the video. And the video is entitled, if you type it in on YouTube, UK Knights Templar Are Not What You Think, Documentary of Secrets and Mysteries. So that's the name of the video, and it's a really good video. I think it's like an hour and a half long. I haven't even watched the whole thing yet. I've only watched an hour of it, and some of the information in it is just really mind-blowing. Also, before I forget, I want to mention that the artwork that is used in this video, for the actual video itself, not the artwork that I put in the community section a day ago, talking about the releasing of the video, but the actual video picture for this video, when you click on it, was compiled and put together by my friend Zarita Marx, and she has her own YouTube channel, so make sure you go and check that out. I will give her credit as well in the description of this video, and I'll give you a link to her YouTube channel as well, so make sure you go and check that out. And I want to thank her very much for doing that. She's a person who's been with me on my spiritual journey and through all the ups and downs of life, and there have been a lot of crazy things lately, so I just want to thank all of my spiritual family and everyone really who's part of my inner circle who knows me. You know who I am, you know what I'm about, and you've helped me on this process, so I want to thank you all. Of course, Jeremiah over at Universal Mastery, his teachings have been helping me get through some of the rougher transitional periods of life, for sure. But from the fires of the forge, from the flames of transformation, we are reborn. Let's get into the Knights Templar. I've rambled on long enough. So the video I just told you about, the title of which I already mentioned, it has Timothy Warren Hogan, who is the Grand Master of the Knights Templar. So you're getting all this information from a legitimate source. It's not just like some new age mumbo jumbo type stuff. So they start out in Scotland. Scotland connects to Freemasonry. Of course, you have the Scottish Rite and all that. But it goes, even deeper and further than that. But Scotland connects to Freemasonry and the Hogan's family line, which is this Grand Master. And seems like a really nice, down-to-earth kind of guy. He seems like a type of dude that I would probably want to hang out with. So Scotland connects to Freemasonry, and his family, his family were Templars and Freemasons. His great-grandfather was one of the fathers of the Revolutionary War. Another grandfather heavily involved in Freemasonry in Scotland. An interesting side note. Oh, I pushed on the arrow there and it took me all the way down to the bottom of the document. Interesting side note. They show a painting of the world's oldest lodge room in the video, and the inauguration of one of his family members. Burns was the last name at that point in history. His family is related to this family, I guess, the Burns. And he's been inaugurated in the picture as Poet Laureate. I don't remember if that's how they pronounce it. Laureate, which means someone who composes poems. And 1787 is when the illustration is supposed to be depicted. So that was kind of cool, I thought. Like I said, I recommend watching the video for yourself. Knights Templar started in 1096. There were 2 knights, a Moor, which is actually, I had to look into that, about what that is. I think it's spelled M-O-O-R-E, but I could be wrong. Maybe it's M-O-O-R. Part of the Muslim population of Christian Europeans designated as such during the Middle Ages. So it actually has tie-ins with like the Muslim faith. I'm actually going to see if I can look that up real quick. Yeah, it's spelled M-O-O-R-S. If you want to know more about that, you type it in on Google. And it should pop right up. There's like a Wikipedia information on it, and then you can do further, deeper research, I'm sure, find more interesting things. But M-O-O-R, and yeah, they seem to have a lot of ties to like the Muslims, and that's how these Knights Templar, they came into alternative information rather than just what the Christian Bible was teaching them. They were getting these influences and this sacred knowledge from other people and their backgrounds as well. So the Knights Templar started in 1096. 2 knights, a Moor, part of the Muslim population, which we just mentioned. Oh yeah, I left a note here. If you want to find out more interesting things about the Moors, especially, type in Moor, M-O-O-R, and then the word occult. I had some interesting things pop up. So you had 2 knights which started the Templars, Hugh de Pines, and I guess this was in 1096, and Godfrey de Saint-Omer. Came together and shared their understanding from different backgrounds in the belief of an advanced ancient civilization. So this started with the flood myth of Genesis, of course, but this story is universal across all religions. So the whole story of Atlantis actually ties into what the Knights Templar were formed for. They were formed because they had a common understanding or a common knowingness or belief in this ancient Atlantean civilization, which was more advanced. And it wasn't just one city, it was an empire, that kind of spanned across the whole world. So that's kind of a misunderstanding that people get sometimes. Although it predated the flood, there were still remnants, preserved philosophy, technology, wisdom, etc. The knights set out to find out more. The journey took them from France into Constantinople. In Constantinople, they went to the church of Saint Sergius and Bacchus, which contained an order called the Brothers of the East. Interesting, they use like the East symbology because a lot of work that you do in Freemasonry, it's kind of more oriented towards the east where the sun rises. It's that whole morning type energy, the dawn, like the masculine rising of the sun, greeting the morning, greeting the day with the strength and the sublime, energy that the sun, the solar energy brings in. But also east is the direction of fire and initiation. That's why the hobbits have to go east to Mordor in the Lord of the Rings. It's an entire, through the fires of initiation, they are being transformed, right? Also, before I forget to mention too, I'm actually, speaking of Lord of the Rings, always seems to come up in one way or another. I am listening to the videos called LOTR, stands for Lord of the Rings, Valinor at Last, an ambient journey for eternal peace. So if anyone wants some of this, and it looks like Gandalf's kind of sitting there, and it looks like almost like a little ancient civilization there. There's Atlantis. Gandalf checking it out. He knows what's up. Okay. So these knights, they went to Constantinople, from France into Constantinople. They went to the church of Saint Sergius and Bacchus, which contained an order called the Brothers of the East, originally founded in Greece in 1057. and had moved to Constantinople into a building designed by an alchemist. They preserved knowledge here about the pre-civilization, and they initiated these two knights, the Hugh de Pines and the Saint Godfrey d'Aumont. Is that how you say it? Godfrey de Saint Homar. I may be pronouncing that not completely correctly, but anyway, these brothers of the East, they preserved knowledge here about the pre-civilization, and they initiated these two knights into a tradition and gave them a mission to start what would become known as the Order of the Temple. Later, the Poor Knights of Christ of the Temple of Solomon. I always thought that title was way too long. The two knights met with one of the greatest scholars of the time in Constantinople, Michael Psellos, author of many books. Not sure how to spell it. His name, I didn't spell it right there, but that doesn't really matter. Theoclete, and also Theoclete, who was a member of the church, and gave them the mission to go to Jerusalem to assemble a team and find certain artifacts. The knights went back to France and met with 7 other knights, and then took them back to Jerusalem, met with Pope Urban II, who granted them land next to what was believed to be the ruins of King Solomon's temple. Here they set up activity and were given the mission to protect all pilgrims in the Holy Land, but there were only 9 knights when this started out. So this was mostly a cover, because for the next 9 years, what they were really doing is they were digging under the Temple Mount and doing archaeological work. They eventually found artifacts which pointed to proof of this civilization, but also found items which were quote-unquote embarrassing, or which would be considered heretical to the Roman Church, dogma of that time. Reporting back to the Pope, they kept the discovery secret for good reason. When they made their reports back to the Pope, they didn't tell the Pope, basically, because they knew this knowledge in the wrong hands would not be a good thing. There was indeed an ancient advanced civilization due to proof they found, so they sought other groups that knew more about it as well. They began to adopt the equal-armed Red Cross, which is used by the Anunnaki of the ancient Sumerians and all over the ancient world, was found on outfits, on the carvings, ancient tablets, etc. And I mean, I could pull up an image right now, but if any of you want to, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with what the Templar cross looks like, just type in Templar cross, on Google, it'll come right up. Or if you go to my community section where I announced that I was doing a Templar video, I posted that yesterday. There's a picture of it on there, and probably on I think on the picture of this video as well, there's a Templar cross. So you'll see it, when you click on this video. So they went out seeking more remnants of this Atlantis civilization, which led them to Egypt, and they set up at the Temple of Isis, which it was at Philae. They began to look for more evidence, so they set up a rule, foundation, or structure. They created a rule, and this is described in the book The Hierarchy pretty well, which we're going to get into the Hierarchy a little bit in this video, but that's a book I recommend if you're into Freemasonry, if you're into any of this stuff, the history of Jesus, the Templars, Freemasonry, Hiram Abiff, the Hierarchy it's a really great book. And especially if you're not like a Freemason, it's going to be able to take you into the world of Freemasonry pretty deep, like much deeper than most other books are willing to go from Masonic authors, Also, I've got Isis sitting here next to me too. Isis is always a, I turned the lamp off actually because I felt that I didn't really need it right now. But normally, if it were later in the day and it were darker, outside and such, I would need that lamp on for reading. But it also makes this little portal thing go away too that I've got going on over here. This little light, this little golden doorway above this Templar plate. Which let me go ahead and show you this as well. There's so many things I want to cover in this video. A buddy of mine actually that I knew really well from high school. We haven't really hung out much. Wow, I like that color right there. That's pretty cool. we haven't really hung out much at all, since like high school and stuff. And he hit me up. He was at my dad's memorial, but he hit me up and he's like, "Hey man, I found this Knights Templar plate." And he's like, he took a picture of it. He didn't know it was specifically Knights Templar. He knew that it was Masonic, and so he hit me up. He knew I was a Mason, and he's like, "Hey, you want this plate?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'll take it off your hands. I don't know if I'll keep it forever, but if I don't keep it, I'll definitely give it to somebody who would really appreciate it or make good use of it." And I used to have on my dad's mom's side, there was somebody in our family that had to have been a Knights Templar, because I used to have a little pocket watch, and it would hang on this little hook, and there was also a lapel which would go on a suit like this at one point in time, and it had a little knight with a sword and the Templar logo, and so it was a Templar knight. And I don't know where that's at now. I may have lost it in one of my previous houses that I was in. I'm not really sure. I would like to get that back if we're ever to be found. But it'll always be in my mind, no matter what. So there's definitely within my own family, I think there's definitely some Templar influence. And I know that my great uncle, I think on my father's side, I think he was a member. He was a junior Grand Warden, I think, of one of the Grand Lodges. So there's definitely, we just hit 2133 too. That was cool. There's definitely some family history going, that's involved with this current of energy, this whole Templar, this whole Freemasonry knighthood type thing. And I've always kind of felt that in my soul. I've always been drawn to medieval type things like Zelda and Elden Ring, obviously, and Lord of the Rings. I've always been more magnetized or drawn to those sorts of things as opposed to, other sorts of movies or video games, etc. Moving on. Always having a sidetrack. They went to Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, if I'm pronouncing that right, leader in the Roman Church, who was Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, or Clairvaux, however you say that. He was secretly practicing a practicing druid, and he was friends with Rashi, a famous Kabbalist within Jewish mystical tradition. And by the way, all these notes that I'm reading from this video, this Templar video, this is just covering the first 30 minutes basically of the video. If you want to dig in deeper and learn more, there's way more to learn from these guys, from this Timothy Hogan. He's been releasing all kinds of videos on YouTube. They had the Templar Gaia, the Gaia series, the Knights Templar, but now you can watch a lot of this stuff for free on YouTube. What's interesting about this rule that they composed for the Knights Templar, the rule was composed of 72 articles, which correspond to 72 Kabbalistic names of God, or, of course, as we know in ceremonial magic, the 72 angels or demons, the 72 angels of the Shem operation, and then you have the 72 goetic demons as well. They then set the structure to continue their research and meeting with different groups around the world who are preserving Greek and Roman texts not known in Europe, particularly Plato's Critias, which describes, Atlantis to some degree. They began digging in more areas, especially in Egypt, and studying their temples. The Egyptians had inherited knowledge from a pre-Diluvian civilization. This became very apparent. The Order of Norman Order of Norman French word for temple was, I think I meant to type origin. So the origin of the Norman French word for temple was actually Allah, believe it or not. So they were really known as the Order of Allah, or the Order of the Temple. So it's all tying into, it's tying into Muslim stuff as well. Because as we know, these three great religions, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, their roots, all of that stuff, it comes from older sources. It's all based in older teachings, and that's what a lot of people don't understand. They like to get caught up in, oh, my religion's right and your religion's wrong, but it's silly. It's just different aspects of the one great mind, different degrees of existence. Their path, their journey is different. What is their soul's evolutionary journey? What is their purpose? It's going to be, heavily based upon that. Hugh de Pines was the first Grand Master. He became the first Grand Master through his Moorish family background. His family was given a fatuus, or a rule from Islamic tradition, giving them permission to dig in special areas. So it's this tie that he had with the Moors and his family that enabled them to really go on this mission and do this work. They came across clay jars which had new texts associated with the Bible, Kabbalah, and the Zohar, and they had to take these scrolls to trusted Jewish sources to be translated. They did not trust this in the hands of the church for obvious reasons. The Zohar spoke of navigational knowledge they were not aware of, so it was teaching them things about the earth. The Templars found, quote, boxes, which were the arks of the covenant. And yes, I said arks, plural. There was not just one. So this is a highly misunderstood thing. If you've watched Indiana Jones, the first Indiana Jones movie, The Ark of the Covenant, I guess technically that would be the first Indiana Jones movie. There was like a TV show, believe it or not, before Indiana Jones, I think, or maybe they released it slightly after The Adventures of Young Indiana Jones. Total side note, I haven't watched many of those, but you know what I'm talking about. That the whole idea we get from the Ark of the Covenant, from Hollywood and all that. But what this is all truly about. So there's these boxes which the Templars found, and the boxes were a form of electrical capacitor. They built up static electricity and could shock you to death. And see, I had a friend which introduced me to a lot of spiritual stuff, Freemasonry and all this sort of thing. And he kind of knew about this already. He knew that the covenant was some kind of electric generator of some kind. And I always thought that was interesting that he'd said that back in the day. I'm like, that's an interesting way to look at it. But now to see that the Grand Master is actually coming out and saying that this is what the Arks of the Covenant were really about, very interesting. And so I think the Templars have like 3 or 4 of them in their possession, and then there's still many out there, I guess. Who knows where they are, Very interesting, though. So the boxes were a form of electrical capacitor. They could build up static electricity and could shock you to death. They probably wouldn't melt everybody's faces like they did in Indiana Jones. It'd be a little bit different than that. They had to keep this hidden from the church. The rods of Aaron were used to transport the covenant. Or I'm sorry, the ark, not the covenant. The promise. The covenant is supposed to be the promise, right? Or a pact. It's an inner knowing. The covenant is really between you and God, but on an even deeper esoteric level, it's the connection between you and your highest self, your true self. If you pick away at all the dross and all the things and all the layers that are not you and get to the primal essence of what you are, there it is, the ultimate covenant, the covenant of self-realization, of self-illumination. Do what thou will, do what thou, ultimate will, your highest self is calling you to do, knows you need to do. It doesn't mean just grasp and grope at whatever you want in the present moment. If that were the case, I would be in a whole lot more trouble than I currently am if I just became a slave to my, all of my body's wants and desires. And that's where we have to be able to channel and appreciate and accept those parts of us and love those parts of us. But we also have to use them in alignment with the self. We don't want these parts of our bodies separated, the intellect and the lower animals. We want it to be an ever-flowing thing where we can come from an authentic space, a genuine space of development. So the rods of Aaron were used to transport these arcs. The vaults were created between Palestine. Okay, so vaults to hold them were created. Various ones were created in between Palestine and Lebanon, Portugal and Scotland to preserve the knowledge temporarily until they had a place to deposit it. This was the beginning of the true mission of the Templars. The church began to realize the Templars had access to hidden resources, so the church gave them authority/permission most people would not have access to. This enabled the Templars to move their knowledge and artifacts back into Europe from these various groups. They built up their organization. They were not just knights on horseback. A lot of people just only visualize knights, fighting battles and, being, really, they were fierce warriors. They didn't retreat, they didn't surrender, and they didn't accept, they fought until the death, typically. Very reminiscent of the Spartans, if you've ever seen the movie 300, that same kind of idea. And they knew that death was not the end, so they weren't afraid to die. They would run headlong into battle, knowing that they'd lived a pure and genuine life, and that they were fighting for something that was, was actually a little bit bigger than just themselves. It was becoming an egregore of its own archetypal awareness. So this organization, it's not just knights on horseback, but they were the first multinational corporation. They had farmers, sea captains, etc. They built ships to transport people. They had scribes, translators, stonemasons. The older rules stated only people who could wear gloves in the order were priests and stonemasons within the order. So that was kind of an interesting thing, that at one point only priests and only stonemasons within the order could wear gloves as part of their uniform. Took too big of a gulp there. Within 200 years, the Templars built over 1,000 Gothic structures in Europe, including the Gothic cathedrals of France. So that was the Templars who built that. Built to preserve some of the knowledge they were carrying over and finding them from archaeological work, as well as the architecture of Notre Dame. I keep seeing 33 too while we're filming this video. I just turned 33 too. I think that's this is a point in my life where I felt a really big energetic shift that day, even that, and I've been taking some steps really towards self-improvement. I'm really proud of myself for some of I'm going to keep some of those things to myself, but some of the personal obstacles I've been trying to overcome and become stronger in that way. We're at 33 minutes in this video too, that's funny. Within the arcs was a substance known as mana. We've heard about this before, especially if you've played Magic the Gathering. Of course, you've got mana. A lot of video games use this as basically, it's your magic source. We hit 33 right when I said that. That was cool. As mana, white powder, which can heal the body quickly. It stimulated consciousness. So this mana could heal the body quickly. It stimulated consciousness. So what way were they using this mana? They were ingesting it somehow to probably invoke higher states of awareness and consciousness and being. And we'll get into some of the alchemical components of this stuff later in the video. And it could be reproduced. The mana could be reproduced. The instructions were in the drawings on the Egyptian walls on how to make it, and they learned from various groups who were preserving this knowledge as well. This led to Templars living much longer than the average human. He doesn't really go into how much longer they lived, but I could definitely see that. If you have spiritual understandings and spiritual knowledge, especially when you're learning practical alchemy and you're able to create medicines and things which give you higher spiritual awareness, you're gonna live longer. You're gonna be more in tune with life. You're gonna be more in tune with your actual higher self. You're gonna be able to channel that more into the present moment, into your own life now. In their digging, they found ancient maps. These alluded to territories across the ocean which had not been explored. Discovered what was later recognized as the magnetic compass. So the Templars, they basically rediscovered the magnetic compass. And they were the first to use them in quote-unquote modern times. These were remnants from this ancient civilization. As they went to the Holy Land, they were charged with looking for texts related to esoteric information, describing other aspects of Genesis from the Torah. So different ways of looking at this story, this original story, pre-Diluvian, or this the flood. Artifacts, scrolls, and the Zohar were all different sources. They gave it to Jewish communities in Spain instead of the Vatican because they could not only transcribe it, but they would also take care of these texts. The same publishing company who published the Zohar for the first time in Toledo, and Toledo, Spain, not Toledo, Ohio. I was so confused when he said that in the video. I'm like, Toledo? Toledo wasn't around back then. What the heck? Yeah, Toledo, Spain. I did not know there was a Toledo, Spain. So the same publishing company who published the Zohar for the first time in Toledo, Spain, published Parsifal in the 1200s. And Parsifal said that the Templars were the guardians of the Holy Grail. I think that's where this kind of in more recent times, well, that's not really recent, but where the tales of the Templars and, King Arthur and all that kind of thing started to come about. And there's actually a book I want to read that a friend of mine is borrowing at the moment. It's called The Templar Revelation. I really want to read that book now that I'm, doing all this Templar research and such. The Grail stories in the Zohar are connected. The Zohar describes the blueprint for how creation is formed. You have 10 emanations or aspects of God's consciousness connected by 22 pathways, which are Hebrew alphabet letters. The hidden 11th sphere, or the 33rd final piece of the Tree of Life, is Da'at. So there are 33 components altogether. Wow, we hit 37, that's cool. The Tree of Life. We're all familiar with the Tree of Life, but if you've never heard of it before, the 10 Sephiroth, the 22 paths, and then you have the hidden sphere here, Da'at. So it's the 11th sphere, or it would be the 33rd piece if you add the 10 Sephiroth and the 22 channels or paths, and then Da'at, or Death, Da'at, was originally, if we want to get into more esoteric stuff, but I've already covered this in previous videos. On the original Tree of Life, there was no Malkuth. Yesod was the bottom, and then you had the black sun here, or Lucifer, and then you had the mundane sun ruled by Michael here. So the higher sun was actually Da'at, and then that's where the abyss now formed. And yeah, if that's something you want to get into, that's an entirely different video that I cover on my channel. I think I talk about that mostly in Lucifer the Devil. There's a playlist. There should be a playlist. It's called like Satan, Lucifer, and the Devil Explained Part 1 or something like that. That series of videos, that's what you're going to want to look up. All right. There we go. Hopefully that light's not so bright now. So this is the Tree of Life. The Zohar describes this blueprint for how creation is formed. It's basically also representative of our DNA. It's shaped in that same way. It's the Tree of Life, also known as the face of God. Part Suf in Hebrew means face, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And El or Al is God. So Parsifal or Parsifal is the face of God, is what it means. So the Templars are the guardians of the Grail. And the Grail is much more than a physical cup, which contains the blood of Christ or whatever. There's a much deeper esoteric component to it. Not sure if we'll get into all of that in this video, but I'm going to touch upon a lot of things in this video, so make sure you're staying tuned. Zohar says there are 7 continents, 1 not populated. That's before the Americas had recently been discovered. The Earth is a ball, or a sphere. The Earth goes around the sun, so it basically teaches truths which were lost and now rediscovered. The functionings of the Earth, essentially. I feel better with the camera kind of more, up like that. The Templars put this information together and set sail for the new land, America, centuries before Columbus ever made it over there. So yeah, Christopher Columbus did not discover America. He was sent like way later. The Templars began to establish trade with the Native Americans, bringing knowledge back to Europe, again, in case they needed to establish something in America. They kept digging, and as we know, of course, America is it's like the chosen land. There's all kinds of ritualistic, energetic sciences which are applied to this landscape, which are really going to bring about this Aeon of Horus in such a way that this is kind of the reawakening. This is the... And no, it's not just going to be some new age woke type thing. Like we're doing this the right way. We are those anybody who's on any genuine spiritual path is going to feel an inner knowing within themselves. This is really, we're at the end of the Kali Yuga now. It's kind of getting towards the end of that, and we're going to have to face some of the darkest dark that we've ever faced. But out of that darkness, we will rise much higher than ever before. So they brought this information from America back to Europe. They kept digging and learning more about the Kabbalistic texts. They realized this was all a gift or a revelation of God. It came from source, and it was a major responsibility they had to uphold. The church could never appreciate this kind of knowledge, nor do they still to this day a lot of the times. The Templars took the ideas of the Tree of Life and incorporated it into their architecture. One of the symbols they became known for using around this time was the 3-armed cross. It represents the middle pillar with 3 horizontal paths. So I'm not going to pull up a picture of it, but if you look up Templar cross horizontal, it should probably come up. The cross itself, the main part's going to be up and down, but there's like 3 horizontal. You got the 1 vertical line, and then you got 3 horizontal lines on this cross. You've probably seen it before, somewhere before, I'm sure. But it represents the middle pillar with 3 horizontal paths. It's called the Cross of Lorraine, so if you want to look that up. The letters Mem are Mem, which corresponds to water, Aleph, air, and Shin, fire, which probably, I'm sure, is representing, it's probably splitting the Kabbalistic tree into 3 different sections, which we've talked about before with the 4 worlds, excluding maybe the physical world at the bottom. But then you've also got that same correspondence here with Atziluth, Bria, and Yetzirah. We've been talking about that a lot lately, so it all ties into this. So those crosses represent these 3 different worlds, I believe, on the Cross of Lorraine. Also on the body represents the 3 crosses. The one on the lower represents where the liquid functions are at the level of the abdomen, the air at the area of the lungs, and then the fire or the heat emanating from the head. This would be like your connection to spirit or source, the crown, the spiritual fire. Any of you who are true initiates, I know you've felt the fires of initiation stirring within your brain cells at certain times. If you felt that fire, then you know what I'm talking about. Also in the body represents, oh, I'm sorry, I just read that part. They applied this to the layout of Solomon's temple, this information. As above, so below, as outlined in the Zohar. The human body is the microcosm of the temple, and the temple becomes the macrocosm of the human body. So we are a microcosm of the temple, but the temple becomes the macrocosm of our bodies as well. As above, so below, as within, so without. The Templars applied this to their cathedrals. I would love to go inside one of the cathedrals, especially like Notre Dame or something like that. I would love to perform ritual there. I don't know that I could ever get permission to go in there and like have it all closed up just so some rituals could be performed, but that would be utterly magical. I could only imagine even just standing in the energy of that place, you know, what would come in, the different influences and energies you would be able to experience and feel. So even in the cathedrals of today and back then, they applied this, the human body, to the church. The baptismal font is at the area of the belly button. The choir is at the area of the lungs. And the sanctuary is at the area of the head of the church itself. The Virgin Mary is represented by the cathedral, the entire cathedral itself. And when you go out of the church or in, you're going through the Vesica Pisces, the birth canal, which is an arch or a womb, and you are thus becoming the Christ. You're being reborn as like a Gnostic Christ. You are awakened to the Christ within. It's not something that just belongs to one man or priesthood or one priesthood or anything like that. So that's something that's been like so misunderstood over time. It's a spark that exists within each and every one of us. Okay, so I'm actually going to turn this music off. I am going to pull up this video itself, and then I'm going to turn the camera around and let you watch, because I figured it would just be easier if you watched this part of the video as opposed to me typing it out. I had already typed out so many notes, and I do still have quite a bit of stuff to go over. So I'm going to go ahead and pull it up here, because I thought this part was super, super interesting. And like I said, I still have not watched the whole thing. $46.17.
Sometimes other should be pointed who you are. One of the charges of heresy codes all throughout the Bible. And tied to this, they began to look at it in new ways. For example, one of the things they looked at was the story of the crucifixion of Jesus. It should be pointed out that Jesus was said to be crucified at Golgotha, a place which means skull. Well, the human skull has 22 bones in it, just like there are 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, just like there are 22 sections of Revelations.
Very interesting. All this skull symbology
The
constantly
letter of the Hebrew
with the
alphabet
Templars.
is Tav, which means cross. That's what Tav actually means in Hebrew. And in Greek, which would be the equivalent of the Greek letter Tau, Tau also means cross. Well, in Hebrew, this letter Tav is actually composed of 3 of the Hebrew letter vowels. So if you put 3 Hebrew letter vowels or V's together, they form the Hebrew letter Tav. Well, vow in Hebrew means nail. So at the end of the Hebrew alphabet, you have a cross and 3 nails. Not only that, but vow in Hebrew has a numeric value of 6. And therefore, 3 nails would be 666, which had nothing to do with the devil, but rather was understood.
Very interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and read this little section that is on the screen there. The number 666 relates to the carbon, atom, and man. Carbon-12, one of 5 elements in the human DNA, is composed of 6 protons, 6 electrons, and 6 neutrons, which equates to 666. Carbon-12 is the most abundant of the 2 stable isotopes of the element carbon, accounting for 98.89% of carbon. Its abundance is due to the triple alpha process by which it is created in stars, and as Carl Sagan had once said, we are made of star stuff. When the 666 of carbon is combined with the elements above and mixed with Lucifer, there Lucifer is mentioned, aka phosphorus or phosphorus, we get a combination or reaction of chemical elements that forms DNA and RNA. This magical God-given chemical code carrier is the very code for all life. And of course, it is the number of a man. His number is 6 neutrons, 6 protons, and 6 electrons. 600, 3 and 6, 666. Various chemical elements, when combined with carbon, forms our very material reality, or what some may call the matrix.
That this was a number of transformation, transforming from one thing out of the material into the spiritual. So the fact that this exists within the Hebrew alphabet and that Hebrew existed long before Jesus was ever said to be around implied that there was a symbolic code written on the Bible, and that this same symbolic code also applied to the Greek just as much as the Hebrew. The Templars began to look at this, and they began to look at these numeric codes and other symbolic...
Okay, and then there's another section of the video, I believe 50-50? Yeah, I wanted to play that too. I thought that was super interesting.
Began looking into or started adopting, in particular, the New Testaments, and allowed the Gnostics of the different branches, including the Kabbalists, the Jewish Kabbalists, and the Christian Gnostics, to form close associations within Europe via the Templars. As the Templars came across other Gnostic groups, they found that some of these Gnostic groups had also been studying something known as alchemy. One of the things that the Templars began looking into or started adopting in particular was
That was really weird. It just popped up a van real quick. What was that all about?
Templars. As the Templars came across other Gnostic groups, they found that some of these Gnostic groups had also been studying something known as alchemy. What?
That's weird. St. John Ambulance, Malaysia. Huh. It just pops up really, really quick. And then look, there's the numbers 3337. Wow. Interesting.
One of the things
just for a split second, it just pops up.
Began looking into
weird.
Started adopting in particular was a particular elixir that they created that was known as the wine of Jerusalem. And this particular wine was an aloe extract infused with hashish, which they had gained from their associations with a group known as the Hashishin, which had existed in areas
or assassins,
like Syria.
Hashishans.
The same word of Hashishin later became known as where the root of the word assassin came from, because they were known to be cunning warriors, but they also used this substance known as hashish. In time, these groups also mentioned that the source of this knowledge came from the area of Egypt. And so the Templars, traveling further into Africa, into the Mediterranean, found themselves down into Giza.
All right, so I thought that section, those couple sections were very interesting, and definitely wanted to show you because they're a bit further in the video. I think the one was at like 45 minutes of the video or somewhere around there, and the other one's like 50 minutes in. So like I said, I just recommend that you go and watch that whole video yourself. Interestingly enough, the Templars, in their knowledge of the breath, made them look into CPR. They were the first to rediscover CPR and use it. Templars obviously show up in video games like Assassin's Creed. We just saw the connection between the Templars and the Hashishans, or the Assassins. Also in Dragon Age, the Dragon Age Origin game, I know at least the Templars are mentioned in there. You actually can become a Templar. You drink from a cup, which we're actually going to be getting into the symbolism of that later on. And Arkham Knight as well. If you've ever played the game Arkham Knight, it's a Batman game. The Arkham Knight character, spoiler alert, the Arkham Knight character itself is like a Templar type character, and there's a whole order which is actually trying to kind of work against Batman a little bit. I recommend looking up some gameplay from that game, the Arkham Knight, and look into who the Arkham Knight character is. He even has a cross on his like armor or whatever. It's totally like based and influenced on like Templar type stuff. So definitely go in, check that out. I could do a whole video on video game stuff. You guys know me. I know there's a couple people that have talked to me about doing video game streams before on my YouTube channel. That's not really what people come to this channel for, particularly, is to watch me play video games. But I've found that a lot of that technology, to be able to do that, it's kind of hard to set it up. You need like 3 or 4 different things, and I'm not very tech savvy. Like, I looked into what it takes to stream a video game, video, and it looks kind of complicated to me. So that's not something I'm really going to invest in, because I already kind of, have decided what this YouTube channel is about. I'm going to be working more on my Patreon as well. I'm going to be getting the new chapter up very soon. I know I keep saying that, but I am pushing forward. I am working on things. I am, making investments in my energy and all those sorts of things. So I am looking forward to that, and I'll let you guys know as soon as that's up, because I know many of you have dropped out of the Patreon, probably because you've already soaked up the information that's in there. And I appreciate each and every one of you who has been a part of the Patreon. So the next thing I want to get into, actually, before I mention this too, though, I want to mention a couple other books, which we won't actually dig into today, but a good brother, Jamie Paul Lamb, has written this book, Myth, Magic, and Masonry. You can get this on Amazon. I highly recommend it. It's a good read. Like myself, he talks about the differences and the connections between like ceremonial magic and Freemasonry. What are the similarities? What are the differences? They kind of come from the same, kind of all comes from the same current, if you will, of, traditional current of Western esoterica. It's all kind of, tied together, but he goes into the connections between the two very well in this book. And it's called Myth, Magic, and Masonry, Occult Perspectives in Freemasonry. So that's kind of where I got my, I think that's where I got my inspiration for my YouTube channel's name, was kind of from the title of this book, even though it's not the main title, it's part of the full title. So Occult Perspectives in Freemasonry. As you can see here, he even has a chapter. I just started rereading this book again last night. I just started. But the integral relationship between Freemasonry and ceremonial magic. So there's a whole chapter on that, or a whole section, I should say. It's the whole first section of the book. Section 2 is solar and astrological symbolism in Freemasonry. Okay. So that's a good one. And then also we were talking about the Hashishans. or the assassins, and the connection with like cannabis and hash, definitely check this book out, Liber 420, Cannabis, Magical Herbs, and the Occult. There's a lot of information in this book that is super, super interesting. I'm not going to get into it now. It's a large book. I've never actually read all of the book. I've skipped around and read different sections because it is so long, but it's written by Chris Bennett. And there's a picture of him there. So looks like he's got a Shriner hat on or something. He must be a Shriner. The book that we're going to get into right now, if you've made it this far into the video, congratulations, because we are finally going to get into some more interesting stuff in regards to the Templars. I know I've recommended this book before, Alchemically Stoned by P.D. Newman. You can get this on Amazon, The Psychedelic Secret of Freemasonry. And, you know, for me personally, I would have these pillars reversed. When I do my workings, I see the white pillar on the left because the left brain hemisphere is the masculine, and then the black pillar would be on the right. So it could be if you're like behind the pillars and you're looking out, now the white pillar would be on my left, the black pillar would be on my right. But that's more working with, if you want to work with the front side of the tree of life, the white pillar's on the left and the black pillar's on the right. But let's go ahead and get into this. I have from pages 76 to 91 marked, but I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to read all of this because it's quite a bit to read, but I'm just going to go ahead and get into it. Masonic Templary Guardians of the Grail. Ever since the early to mid-13th century, when German Knight Wolfram von Eschenbach, I'm probably butchering that name, identified them as such in his epic poem Parsifal, the legendary Knights Templar have been closely associated with the mythical Knights of the Holy Grail. In the paragraphs which follow, it will be demonstrated that von Eschenbach's association may have influenced the development of the Templar knighting ceremony in the York Rite and the Knight Kadash degree in the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite. It is on this account that the author has come to view Masonic Templary as something of a modern guardian of the authentic Grail tradition. Let us take a moment to briefly touch upon some of what is the Grail tradition actually. It will also be helpful to examine a couple of primary literary precursors. I'm going to skip around a little bit. The Holy Grail is most commonly depicted as being the cup from which Jesus Christ drank during his Last Supper prior to being crucified. The cup was later used, according to legend, by Joseph of Arimathea to collect the mixture of blood and water which flowed from the laceration in Jesus' side made by the lance or spear of Roman soldier Longinus. Being thus sanctified, the cup was then said to have been imbued with miraculous virtues such as curative powers and the ability to make barren land fertile. And it was for the purpose of preserving the sacred vessel that the Order of the Knights of the Holy Grail was originally founded. Interesting. As a literary precursor to this tale, several scholars have sought to identify the legend of the Holy Grail with the Welsh legend of King Bran, the mythical king of Britain, and his magical cauldron. I'm assuming there's some connection between that and the Black Cauldron movie. I don't know if any of you watched that when you were younger. I really liked that movie. So the magical cauldron was said to have similar qualities to the Holy Grail. It was able to mysteriously restore the dead to life. Magical characteristics such as these were not limited to King Bran's cauldron, but were also attributed to Bran himself. According to the Mabinogi, an ancient book of Welsh folklore, after realizing his impending fate, the king ordered that his head be severed and returned to Britain, where, like the singing severed head of the poet Orpheus, it continued to speak, and in some cases even prophesize. After some 80 years, however, the head ceased speaking, at which time it was taken to a place called White Hill and buried facing the direction of France in order to protect the British from French invasion. That's interesting. The legend even goes on to declare that it was none other than King Arthur, the same who features prominently in the Grail tradition, who recovered the skull from its place of rest. Interesting. In more recent times, scholars have sought to align the Holy Grail with the golden platter on which the severed head of St. John the Baptist was served to the dancing Salome by the remorseful King Herod. So there was a golden platter on which the head of John the Baptist was served to the dancing Salome by the remorseful King Herod. I'm not sure what the definition of Salome is. Jewish princess. It was his she was granddaughter of Herod the Great. Okay. I see. The reader is asked to note that in both cases, the object identified as a forerunner of the Holy Grail is directly associated with the motif of a severed head. The Knights Templar were formed in the 12th century for the noble purpose of escorting Christians on their pilgrimage through the Holy Land. After inventing a system that is widely recognized as the forerunner of modern banking, the Templars grew exceedingly wealthy to the point that the powers that be, that is, the crown and tiara, sought to relieve them of their riches. And in 1307, a statement was issued by the debt-ridden King Philip IV of France, declaring the Templars to be heretics. A great many of them were subsequently arrested, interrogated, tortured, and executed, their wealth then claimed by the greedy Philip. While no holy cup was reported to have ever been discovered among the Templars' treasure, the most widespread of the confessions made by the knights during their interrogation was the collective veneration of a mysterious severed head, reportedly called Baphomet, which was used by them during their ceremonies of initiation. According to 19th century Viennese Orientalist Joseph von Hammer-Purgstall, who believed that Baphomet was not the name of a deity, but rather the title of a secret Ophite Gnostic initiation ritual, the word Baphomet is a combination of the two Greek words Baphe and Metis, which when combined translates to the baptism of wisdom. Of course, this may have been less of literal and more of a metaphorical baptism, although it is perhaps notable that von Eschenbach specifically refers to the Knights of the Holy Grail as, quote, baptized men. As stated, the lore surrounding the Grail tradition is intimately connected with legends involving severed heads. These two seemingly separate themes, a sacred cup and a severed head, would appear somewhat irreconcilable if it was not for two Masonic degrees styled Templar. In both the Knight Templar ceremony in the York Rite and the Knight Kadash degree in the ancient accepted Scottish Rite, Southern jurisdiction, the candidate is made to seal his obligation by drinking wine from the cap of a human skull, thus uniting neatly the theme of the sacred cup or libation with that of the skull or severed head. The practice, though, is not unique to Freemasonry. So it's not just a Masonic thing, it's something that goes back much, much, much further. We find a historical precedent in the potentially shocking rituals once observed by the Goths of Scandinavia. So the Goths of Scandinavia, who, according to the research of the English Freemason Reverend George Oliver, were prone to drink alcoholic libations from the cap of a human skull. Paraphrasing from Oliver's 1840 work, The History of Initiation, Albert Pike says in Morals and Dogma that the initiatory rituals of this Eastern Germanic tribe included A. Long probation of fasting and mortification, circular processions, and many fearful tests and trials. The candidate was obligated upon a naked sword, as is still the custom in the modern rite, and sealed his obligation by drinking mead out of a human skull. Turning our attention to the Far East, we find that the ritual motif of drinking from a human skull also plays a central role in the ceremonial observances of the reclusive Shiva-worshipping Aghora of India, as well as the remote Vajrayana Buddhists of Tibet, both of whom preserve the curious rite of imbibing libations from a sacred kapala or skull cap. These Kapalas, or Kapalas, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, Kapala, are often employed by the practitioners of Vajrayana Buddhism for the additional purpose of making religious offerings to the deific Dharmapalas, who themselves are frequently depicted as bearing these strange yet fascinating relics. The word Dharmapala, literally translated, means defender of the faith, which itself is a phrase that should be particularly meaningful to every Masonic Templar. So these Buddhists, these skulls are often employed by the practitioners of this sect of Buddhism for the additional purpose of making religious offerings to this deific Dharmapalas, who are frequently depicted as bearing these strange yet fascinating relics. And the word Dharmapala means defenders of the faith. Interesting. However, they're also employed in tantric empowerments, during which, according to Kagyu lay Lama Mike Crowley, interesting, somebody took that last name, or it was already their last name, the Kapala is regularly filled with one or more inebriants. So you see that a lot of the times, like the newer initiation systems, they don't use like these actual like hallucinogens anymore, but in the ancient cultures and in the more ancient traditions, they were. So these newer traditions, it's like a substitute. It's almost like a more watered down version, if you will, of the original experience, which would have been more of a psychedelic experience, but not psychedelic in the way of a bunch of people, you know, going to a certain event and just being silly and being really not channeling their energy in a particular way. But when you do this in a ceremonial setting, in a very mature, ritualistic type of setting, the effects of these things are going to be much more profound. They're going to be much more spiritual, because they're going to be understood by the adept. The adept's going to have a real reason for why they're undergoing this. They're not just doing it for fun. They're not just doing it out of boredom. Like, there's a real purpose. There's a real purpose to why they want to take the sacrament, essentially. Now I gotta find my spot. Frederick Shade, in his The Quest for the Holy Grail and the Modern Knights Templar, provides an outline of several other similarities between what he calls the Templar Hallows and the Lesser Hallows of the Grail tradition. Makes me think of the Deathly Hallows. The Lesser Hallows of the Grail tradition are described as being certain sacred relics for which the Grail Knights are searching, and in addition to the Holy Grail, the similarities between the so-called Templar Hallows and the Lesser Hallows of the Grail tradition include, among other things, the dish of bread, which is the food given to the pilgrim on his arrival, and the skull of mortality, with which the novice undertakes a year of penance and with which the imprecations are made. Shade goes on to say that there are several other hallows and sacred signs in the Templar tradition. Some of the lesser hallows of the Grail cycle are suggested here, such as the Templar crucifix, with the nails prominently displayed thereon. And we just saw the symbolism of the nails with the Hebrew letters earlier. There's the knight's sword, which is to be wielded in defense of the faith, and also his shield, all which are beautifully explained in the quotation from St. Paul. They may not necessarily come directly from the Grail legend, but they certainly evoke many aspects of that tradition and resonate as hallows in their own right. Von Eschenbach's association of the Knights Templar with the mythical Knights of the Holy Grail may very well have had more than a minor influence on the development of the Templar knighting ceremony in the York Rite and the Knight Kadosh degree. I'm assuming I'm pronouncing that right. Knight Kadosh, maybe it's Kadosh. I should know that myself. Because of the probability of said influence, it is the author's opinion that Masonic Templary can rightly be called a modern guardian of the authentic Grail tradition. Furnished with all that such entails, this is true for the candidate who sits silently contemplating in the grim chamber of reflections at the commencement of the Templar ceremony, where the human skull present there still has the potential to exhibit that miraculous power of prophetic speech attributed to the severed head of the mythical King Bran. Surrounded oftentimes with oracular messages such as, "I was what you are," and more importantly, "I am what you will be," does not the skull in the chamber of reflection speak something for our fate to us all? Is not the bitter cup of death that from which every man must sooner or later partake? And especially those of us who have a lot of Scorpio influence, there's a lot to be said for death energy. Sex, death, and transformation, all of these sorts of things. So yeah. So I just read a whole chapter in this book. It's called Masonic Templary, Guardians of the Grail, in Alchemically Stoned. Now I think there's probably 2 more chapters in this book that I could potentially there are 2 more chapters, but I don't know that I really want to read through 2 more chapters at the moment. But I will read a little bit of the next chapter. So the other 2 chapters in this book that you're going to want to go and check out is Baphomet and the Golden Fleece. And then make sure you also check out the Holy Grail and Soma. So they're going to get into the Soma drink, which was like a cannabis-infused drink. Probably what they were talking about earlier. Timothy Hogan, he was talking about, what do they refer to it as? Wine of Jerusalem. I think that's what he called it. So yeah, let me read just a little bit more from this book, because if I just continue to read straight out of this book for too long, it's going to make this video extremely long, and I still have quite a bit of things I want to cover. I think this video is probably going to end up being about 2 hours long if I had to guess. But let's continue. Baphomet and the Golden Fleece. Baphomet, the alleged deific icon of the Knights Templar, has remained something of an enigma to scholars for centuries. The figure was described by some as having been a mysterious severed head which was possessive of magical qualities. However, the most well-known depiction of Baphomet comes from French occultist and Freemason Eliphas Levi. Some people say Eliphas Levi, I think. I don't know if there's a really right or wrong way to say it. His sketch of the same, or his sketch of Baphomet, in his highly influential work, The Dogma and Ritual of High Magic. In said book, Baphomet is depicted as being a winged hermaphroditic hominid with the head and legs of a goat, but having the torso of a man. It was established in the previous chapter that the name of Baphomet was in all probability a coded reference to an Ophite Gnostic Templar initiatory ritual, wherein was made use of a sacred grail of libation, the same having been fashioned from the skull cap of a severed head, that is, a kapala or skull cup. The precedent for such a rite has been set by ritual observances throughout the Occident, if I'm pronouncing that word right, and Orient alike. So why then was Eliphas Levi, an occultist of no small amount of learning, apt to depict the figure as being related to a goat? Was Levi simply confused, or was he employing a blind for the purpose of misdirecting profane eyes? These are the questions which will be treated in the paragraphs below. So yeah, Baphomet's really it's like an alchemical symbol. It represents certain alchemical components. It has the as above, so below correspondence. It's hermaphroditic, so it's really a unification of the masculine and the feminine within the practitioner themselves. It's the alchemical marriage taking place within, so that you can have access to basically more more of an interconnection to your entire self, your whole self, your authentic self. You are in a sense, you are embracing the animalistic aspects as well as the spiritual components, because it's the goat head, but the goat head also has the upright pentagram, typically right in the center of the forehead. So that represents spiritual illumination, or spirit over matter, right in the middle of the forehead where the third eye is on the Baphomet. So that's an interesting symbol to take into account as well. We explained in the previous chapter the name Baphomet is assuredly a combination of the two Greek words baphe and metis, which when translated into English yields the phrase baptism of wisdom. The Baphomet skull venerated by the Knights Templar has been variously identified as the head of Bran, the mythical king of Britain, and more significantly the head of John the Baptist, the initiator of Christ. In the present chapter, we will examine yet another possible candidate for the historical, literary validation of our cherished skull grail, the head of the Gorgon Medusa. But before we get to that, let us take a moment to look at still another famous skull that was said to have been in the possession of the historical Knights Templar. In his 1921 work, Freemasonry and the Ancient Gods, J.S.M. Ward, the founder of the Anthropological School of Masonic Research, recounted a disturbing yet fascinating tale that has allegedly come down to us from the very trials of the historical Templars. While the story is a fiction, which was concocted in an attempt to slander the Knights of the Temple, it is not without pertinence regarding our task at hand. According to Ward, a great lady of Mariclea was loved by a Templar, a lord of Sidon, but she died in her youth, and on the night of her burial, this wicked lover crept to the grave, dug up her body, and violated it. Then a voice from the void bade him return in 9 months' time, for he would find his son. Very weird story. He obeyed the injunction, and at the appointed time opened the grave again and found a head on the leg bones of a skeleton, skull and crossbones. The same voice bade him guard it well, for it would be the giver of all good things, and so he carried it away with him. It became a protecting genius, and he was able to defeat his enemies by merely showing them the magic head. It does sound a lot like the story of Medusa, quite a bit. And there is a connection as well between pirates, actually, and the Knights Templar. I think that's an interesting thing to note as well. It's hard to find information on that, a lot about that, like pirates and why they had the skull and crossbones like on their flagships, because if you watch like Jordan Maxwell's his information, he'll say, yeah, the pirates were Knights Templar, and that's what the Pirates of the Caribbean movie is really all about. So I'm gonna have to go back and watch that movie after I do some more research on the Knights Templar for sure. All right. Drawing from this account, Carl A.P. Ruck and his co-authors Mark A. Hoffman and Jose Alfredo Gonzalez Celdron, I'm probably butchering that name, added that the Knights Templar adopted the Crux de Casata as their flag and emblem. They depicted it as crossed leg bones beneath the skull, supposedly as a reference to Golgotha, the Hill of Skulls, but perhaps not without knowledge of the Gorgon head. This is especially likely because in Templar lore the skull was used as a magical weapon, just as Perseus used the Gorgon head. It is this amazingly perceptive injunction on the part of Ruck, Hoffman, and Celdron which provides the key to understanding precisely what is being implied by the name and essential nature of Baphomet. According to myth, Perseus was the first of the Greek heroes and was the legendary founder of the city of Mycenae, Mycenae. In order to win his bride, Andromeda, Perseus was charged with the impossible task of recovering the head of the Gorgon Medusa, who, like our own Baphomet, was described as being part human and part beast, in this case half serpent. Perseus's quest for the Gorgon head has been rightly associated by scholars with Heracles' search for the golden apples of the Hesperides? I can't pronounce that. And more importantly, Jason's quest for the golden fleece. And that has connections with, obviously, the golden fleece and the lambskin apron, which is worn by Masons. In each of these cases, the prize was finally discovered in a serpent-guarded tree amidst a sacred garden or grove. So yeah, I think I've probably already read enough to like kind of pique your curiosity there. So I will let each and every one of you, go out, get a copy of this book, and read it for yourself. And maybe in future videos, if you want, we can cover the rest of that chapter, and we can cover the other chapter that I mentioned as well. But for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and move on right now. If any of you are curious too, I don't know if you guys could see my big ass watch that I have here. I don't wear this watch very often. I usually only wear it if I'm wearing, like, if I'm dressed up in a suit and tie, or just a tie and a dress shirt, but it has the Masonic square and compasses on there. It's a pretty nice watch. My sister got that for me many Christmases ago. And then of course I've got my ring here too, which is just the classic square and compasses, red color with some of the working tools on the side. Some cool symbolism there. Very, very pretty ring. It's I've had it since probably like 2016, maybe somewhere around then. So it's been with me a lot of places. It's been on a lot of journeys. So there's a lot of power in this ring. So really anything that we put energy into, and we put focus and things, they become our own personal talismans. They give us power. I'm able to pull some energy from this ring because it's just the symbol of it is the G, it's the presence of God, the great architect. It's the generative principle. It's the masculine and the feminine merging together to bring out this God force. And if you want to look at it from a negative perspective, the G is trapped in there. The God force is trapped in there. But from the more positive aspect of things, it's the portal through which the God force is coming through. You can be the G in the center. You can be the portal, the vessel which carries the God influence through it, which is really a universal force, like the Force from Star Wars. There's no dogma really surrounding the primal essence of what God is. There's just the Hermetic principles, which are going to teach you, what are the energetic sciences and nuances of source, and how do these things manifest in our lives, and all of these sorts of things. Kabbalistic sciences and all that. All right, moving on. I also have a Holy Bible here, which does, there is a brief description of each degree of Freemasonry in the beginning. So you've got the descriptions of like the Blue Lodge degrees, and then the Scottish Rite degrees, and then you also have the description of some of the Eastern Star ritual as well. Let's go ahead and jump to what it has to say about the Knights Templar. The Order of Knights Templar. This degree reverts to the period of the Crusades and to the city of Jerusalem for its origin. So each degree is like a story that takes place somewhere. The Templars of that era were preeminently distinguished as warriors of the cross. They were famed for self-denial, frugality, modesty, piety, and bravery. It is said that their arms were their only finery, and they used them with courage without dreading either the number of strength of the barbarians. without dreading either the number or strength of the barbarians. With confidence in the Lord of hosts, they fought for his cause, aiming at a sure victory or a Christian and honorable death. Such is the background of the Masonic Knights Templar. Of the original Templars at Jerusalem, there were 3 classes of members: knights, chaplains, and serving brethren. Requirements for admission were rigid, including soundness and constitutional health, in mentality and morals, freedom from debt, free birth, and without other obligations that would interfere with loyalty and fidelity to the Order of Templars. The obligations assumed were of a highly religious character and in the name of God. The rites and ceremonies were secret. Templars were sworn to consecrate their all, including their lives, to the defense of the mysteries of the faith, and to that of the unity of God, to cross the seas in battle against infidels, if need arise. The institution suffered many vicissitudes, was forced to give up Jerusalem as the seat of the order, and ultimately to scatter throughout Europe. The act of cruelty and injustice by which the Templar order was dissolved in the 14th century bequeathed in a glorious memory on the names of the infamous King Philip the Fair of France and the no less infamous Pope Clement. Pope Clement made a list of 120 charges against the Order of Templars, blasphemous and libelous to the utmost degree, preposterous and utterly false to the tenets and practices of the order. Masonic Knights Templar is, in many respects, a glorious succession of the ancient Templars of Jerusalem. So there is a connection. It's like the modern, I would refer to it as like the modern offshoot or branch of, the more ancient Knights Templar. Modern adaptation, if you will. Shot through and through with a militant Christian spirit, inculcating the fundamental conviction that right must prevail and that oppression by any class whatsoever must be overthrown, and demanding the defense of Christian truth, principles, and practices, it produces the type of crusaders needed in this present age of insidious war against Christianity. Or more esoterically, anybody who would seek to prevent people from being free to practice whatever belief or religious system they wish to. So that's what's really great about America. People like to complain about this country, but this is a place where people have the freedom to have different spiritual experiences and different belief systems. And look at how many people are into like paganism and witchcraft and things of this nature. Like, this country is a safe place where people can practice those sorts of things, and they should be allowed to. We're far enough in history. We should all kind of just come together at this point. And we've argued over the dumbest things for so long. People have been polarized for so long. It's happened again with all the political stuff that's been going on recently. People have just been so polarized. But if people would just slow down in their lives and really come to the understanding that there's a more universal force, there's a more universal understanding to all of this. We just hit 133 in the video too. There's a more universal understanding to all of this. So just keep that in mind. There's something much bigger and much more important going on here. It has been truly said of Masonic Knights Templar that it is an order particularly fitted to American institutions. It embraces those ideals which have made human liberty the watchword of ages. It impresses one with his responsibility not only as a man and Mason, but as a citizen and defender of the society of which he is a part. Nothing seditious can live in the ranks of Knights Templar. It offers no asylum to the disloyal and no succor to those who seek to destroy what the forebears of this country built. To be a Knight Templar, a man must be right with God and country, honest with himself and others, ever ready to lay down his life, if need be, in the service of truth, righteousness, and justice. A Knight Templar is pledged to follow the banner of his order and the American flag wherever they lead in human service, no matter what may be his condition in life or station in society. So I thought I would read that small section, and each degree of Masonry has a different section that you can read like that. So that was the Order of Knights Templar. Continuing on with the notes, I'm gonna have to go grab my water real quick too. different waters sitting around. But doing all this talking is making me kind of thirsty. All right. Of course, if you know anything about Templarism or the Knights Templar, you probably know about Friday the 13th. That's when all the Templars were arrested. And Jacques de Molay, which is the Grand Master of the Knights Templar, he spoke a curse into existence. And we're going to get into that in just a minute. I'm going to read just a little bit from the Knights Templar. This is by Conrad Bauer. I think that's how you say his last name. Hidden History of the Knights Templar, the Church's oldest conspiracy. It's a really little book. So if you're like just learning about the Knights Templar, this is like a good place to start. It just has mostly just like general history in it. There's not a lot of esoteric stuff in here, but there are some interesting things. So Jacques de Molay was the first Grand Master. I think he was the first. Well, I don't know if he was the first Grand Master, but I just know he was the Grand Master of the Knights Templar at the time when they were arrested. If you've ever watched the movie Nightfall, or I'm sorry, it's a TV show. I think it was on like History Channel. Nightfall, I want to say that's what it's called. I think you can watch it on Netflix still, if I'm not mistaken. The first season of that is really good. I think the second season ended up being pretty weak in comparison to the first season. The same thing kind of happened with the Spartacus show, if you've ever seen that. But the first season I thought was really good, and they had Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker, playing one of the Templar guys. Not Jacques de Molay, but one of the other characters in the show. So it's definitely worth watching. Of course, it has some drama and stuff in it, but you have to. So of course, there's the love story, and there's no good movie or show without a good love story too, right? Because we're all seeking that. We all want that. You know, that pretty cool love story. You know, it's I think that's something we all seek, whether we want to admit it or not. We are looking for that other aspect of the divine within another person that we can really share that connection with and have that alchemical marriage and really rise in consciousness from the union of the two people merging and working together. But Jacques de Molay is also the kids' version of Freemasonry. So I'm not sure what the starting age is for younger boys, but they can join de Molay, which is, they have a lot of charity and very similar to like the Freemasons. It's basically like just a younger man's version of Freemasonry, because typically you need to be 19 years or older, at least in Ohio, to join Freemasonry. So if you're younger and you're interested in this sort of thing, I do recommend de Molay. My grandfather on my dad's side was in de Molay, but he never became a Freemason. He met my grandma instead and ended up going into the Korean War and all that stuff. So I guess I'm the one that's being called to pass the Freemasonic current, you know, for now. So there's a section in the beginning of this book where it talks about the Pope would actually claim to absolve the sins for warriors who would involve themselves in the crusade. So basically they would say, if you go and fight for us, we'll absolve you of your sins. You can see this happening in the story of Dante's Inferno, the video game. It's the video game story of Dante is not the same as the book. The book Dante, or the Divine Comedy, is not the same as what the story of the video game is. And there's actually an animated series. I think you can just watch it all on YouTube for free. Just type in Dante's Inferno movie, and there should be a movie about it. But that's what the Pope does in the movie and in the video game. he tells Dante that he will absolve him of any sins that he's basically, committed or whatever. He will absolve the sins if he goes and fights for the Pope or, the Vatican, essentially, which is pretty messed up. To be able to claim that power and then not actually be able to do that. And sin, to me, there's no such thing as sin. There really isn't. It's kind of an outdated way of thinking and modality. Now, karma is very real. So it's more of an input-output system. What you put out into the universe, that cause will in turn have an effect which returns. So it's like a cycle of evolution. So it's more about karma than it is about any kind of sin. And really, to have bad karma, quote unquote bad karma, is to go against what your higher self knows is better. If you know internally that something is for your benefit and you're constantly rejecting that, or you're turning away from your own highest self, that would be bad karma. That's what I would consider bad karma. Or if you're doing something that's not in alignment with who you truly are, or you're just totally rejecting the inner child, if you're rejecting that inner knowing, that would be bad karma. So even when things, and there's going to be things in your life which are will try to show you that, whether it's even through physical pain, getting sick and things of that nature. I was getting sick a lot when I was working against myself, when I was not in alignment with myself there for a while, and I was just falling into a deeper level of despair and kind of just, you could call it sin, but really just bad karma, like me not making the right decisions and me making bad decisions which were causing me to fall further and further in this hole, symbolically speaking. But anyway, enough on that. So yeah, make sure you check out the video game Dante's Inferno and that animated movie. And of course, it did not work out to Dante's benefit, because he ended up cheating on his, spoiler alert, if you want to watch that movie or play that game, though, Dante ends up cheating on his beloved Beatrice. And he thought that the Pope could absolve his sins, but instead he just ends up getting damned and having to travel all the way through hell and basically battle Lucifer, which is totally, we know that idea of heaven and hell is not really reality. It's just more of a metaphorical way of looking at different densities, or you could say different vibrations of existence. So there are hellish things within life, but there are also heavenly things within life. So heaven and hell exist both within and without. It's more a state of being, or a vibratory resonance that you are finding yourself attracting as your soul is working through densities of existence, if that makes sense. It's a more esoteric way of looking at it. I've read in some books that Dante himself, the actual author of the Divine Comedy, was a Templar, that he was actually a Knight Templar, and that some of his books, his book, The Divine Comedy, is based on like divine inspirations and visions that he had. And I'm actually going to go grab the book right now, because I know it's over here. I have two different versions of Dante's The Divine Comedy. This is one that's really beautiful. It's an illustrated version. Yeah, there's all the angels and basically God, the dot in the center of the vortex, the circle, of course. Gold pages. And I've shown this book in other videos. I have a whole playlist dedicated to the Divine Comedy, where I go into Dante and talk about that a whole lot. I recommend you go and check out those videos if you ever have the time as well. But yeah, it's a beautiful allegory. It's a beautiful story. Really, it's a story of initiation, working through the darker aspects of self and then being able to rise up from that, and really just having a total understanding of self, a deeper understanding of the laws and the rules of cause and effect, or karma. So Friday the 13th we were talking about before, the details of the curse are in the Templar book, page 100 to 102. So let me go ahead and read that really quick. So as these men are being burned at the stake, the Templars were burned alive. They died slowly but refused any help that was offered to them. Henry Charles Lee commends the dignity and composure with which the Templars died and notes that their martyr status was confirmed by the people in attendance, who collected the ashes from the fire and claimed them as relics. But the death was not quite so simple. As he stood in the fires, the flames licking up around his bare flesh and blistering his skin, Jacques de Molay lashed out with his tongue. As he died his slow and painful death, with the nerve endings in his skin roasting one by one, de Molay screamed out a curse on his persecutors, Philip IV and Clement V. He bellowed would soon join him. Before the end of the year, they too would be standing in front of God to answer for what they had done. As the smoke and the flames rose higher and higher, those in attendance heard the curse, but could not know just how unerringly accurate it would become. King Philip's death was entirely unexpected. At the age of 46, several months after the executions of the Templars, he took to one of his beloved hunting trips. Though he was a relatively healthy man and surrounded by attendants, they could do nothing to prevent their king being struck down by a stroke. After the initial attacks, Philip spent the next few weeks attempting to recover from this accident and surviving in great pain. He died shortly after. Interesting. So the power of curses, it's a very real thing, of course. Pope Clement's death was even stranger. Despite his age, his death was equally unexpected. After being discovered dead, his body was laid in state as is tradition. Over the church, however, a huge thunderstorm began to brew. In the deepest darkness of the night, a lightning bolt struck the church where his body was kept and set it ablaze. Wow. The church burned so fiercely and the flames were so hot that despite the rain and people's attempts to quell the fire, the building was destroyed. With it, Clement's body was damaged beyond all recognition. After less than a year, Jacques de Molay's curse had been fulfilled. Our account of the curse comes from a man who was present at the burning of the Templars, Geoffrey of Paris, who was the man who recorded the curse, which was discovered by Malcolm Barber. The stories of the curse have also been passed down elsewhere, however, in ancient rituals involving the Freemasons, whom we will cover in the next chapter, have demanded that those welcomed into the order trample on a papal tiara and a French crown, enacting vengeance on behalf of de Molay. And we see this trampling on the crown whole idea in certain rituals of the Illuminati, the Bavarian Illuminati as well. The scars of his death have been remembered by this organization with close ties to the Templars. The final chapter in the history of the Curse of de Molay comes during another turbulent time in France's history. During the French Revolution, King Louis XVI of France was executed. He was taken to the guillotine and beheaded in public in 1793. Legend says that nearly 500 years after a French king had publicly executed the Grand Master of the Templars, a man ran from the crowd in the square before the guillotine. According to whomever you choose to believe, he either thrust his hand into the pool of royal blood or lifted the severed head up to the crowd. As he did so, he screamed to the watching people, "Jacques de Molay, you have been avenged." So that was in 1793, was when that execution took place of that king. And the Knights Templar, they were arrested and burnt at the stake. I was trying to find the date. Obviously Friday the 13th. I don't know why it's not listed here. I'll have to Google it really quick. (1314) was when that happened. They burned at the stake. So yeah, this is way later. This is 1793. So all those years later, this guy comes out after this king's beheaded, and then he says, Jack D. Malay, you have been avenged. Very interesting stuff going on there. All right. So there's a bit more stuff I do want to talk about. We are already an hour and 50 minutes into this video. I knew this video would be pretty long, but I wasn't quite sure if it would be this long or not. I am going to go ahead and read from the Hiram Key. Obviously, the Hiram Key, I've done a whole playlist on this book. I have a whole playlist dedicated to this book. I've done like maybe 7 videos or so on it. Maybe not quite that many, I can't remember, but go and check out that playlist if you want to hear more from this book as well. So I'm going to jump to page 33, interestingly enough, and then I'm just going to read from 33 to the end of the chapter, and the chapter is called the Knights Templar, so it's chapter 3 of the book, page 33. The seal of the order. The first seal of the Templars depicted 2 knights riding on a single horse, and it is usually claimed that this is a device to signify the poverty to which the members were sworn, and that they could not afford a mount for every knight. This would have made them a very inefficient fighting force had it been based on truth. The French rule, however, states that the master must have 4 horses, and 1 chaplain brother, and 1 clerk with 3 horses, and 1 sergeant brother with 2 horses, and 1 gentleman valet to carry his shield and lance with 1 horse. Clearly, there was no shortage of available mounts. It occurred to us that this seal might represent the 2 grades of knights within the one order, those who were more advanced who were allowed to share in the Templar secret, and those in the back seat who did not. So really, it's the whole idea of like an inner and outer order of any organization. You see this a lot with like the whole Golden Dawn and all of that. This interpretation of the seal is, of course, pure speculation, but it seems certain that they did have a secret, and once the Templars had done away with the 12-month probationary period, they would have needed some method to protect themselves from unproven and potentially untrustworthy newcomers. So, organization of the order itself. The order did not consist only of knights. There were 2 lesser classes besides the full brothers. The first were known as sergeants, who were recruited from what we would now describe as the working class, rather than the nobility that was the source for the knights. They undertook such positions as grooms, stewards, sentries, and general support troops. Like their betters, they wore a red cross, but the mantle itself was a dark brown rather than white, reflecting their lack of purity in relation to knights of the order. The other group comprised the clerics, who looked after the spiritual needs of the knights. They were the only literate members of the order and were themselves priests, taking care of record-keeping and communications, sometimes writing in very complex codes. French was the spoken and administrative language of the Templars, but these versatile priests could say the Mass in Latin, haggle with local traders in Arabic, and be quite capable of reading the Old Testament in Hebrew and the New Testament in Greek. They served the spiritual needs of the fighting men and were distinguished by the wearing of the Templar cross on a green mantle. These clerics would consecrate the bread and wine at the Eucharist like a modern-day priest, but they took this duty so seriously that they were said to wear white gloves at all times, except when actually handling the host during the service. As the bread was the body of Christ, it was important not to soil it with the dirt of profane day-to-day activities, and white gloves were worn to keep their hands clean enough to handle the body of God. This wearing of white gloves was to us an obvious parallel with the modern Freemason, who always wears white gloves to his lodge meetings. We don't actually do that at our lodge, so not every lodge does that. No reason has ever been given for this practice. Could this, we wondered, be a Templar connection? Another distant echo of current Masonic practice lies in the Templars' use of sheepskin as their only permitted form of decoration, as well as their requirement of their rule that they were to wear tight sheepskin breeches beneath their outer clothing at all times as a symbol of innocence and chastity. It is an alarming thought in this age of personal hygiene, but these conscientious knights did not remove their breeches even to wash themselves. That's kind of gross. After a few days, let alone the many decades that many of them spent under the desert sun, their chastity must have been totally guaranteed. No kidding. While Freemasons today do not wear breeches, they do wear white lambskin aprons and lodge meanings, which we were told is the badge of innocence and the emblem of friendship. One more similarity struck us as pointing to a possible Templar connection. We found that the Buissant, the Templar battle flag, consisted of two vertical blocks, one white and one black. The black symbolizing the world of sin the knight had left behind to enter the order, and the white reflecting the move from darkness to light. The modern Freemasons Lodge always displays at its center a pattern of black and white squares, and at lodge meetings every brother wears a white shirt with a black tie and suit. If he does not, he will not be admitted as he is not properly clothed. No one has ever explained why Freemasons wear lambskin and black and white in order to be considered properly clothed. The only reason offered is that our ancient brethren always dressed this way. And that's not necessarily the case. Like if we have a brother that comes to a meeting and, say he just got off work or something, we would much rather him just come to the meeting and show up in his work clothes than to not come at all. So that's not really the case with all lodges, but typically when you're putting on like degree work or you're going to be an officer of a lodge, you do want to wear like your actual suit and tie, You want to wear your whole regalia. Whilst there are a number of parallels here, we did not seek to make too great a play on these similarities, as we wanted to be sure that we were not starting to see what we wanted to see. These powerful coincidences were circumstantial pieces of evidence, but they did fuel our enthusiasm for exploring the connection between the two orders more closely. We now had a burning question. What had the Knights Templar found which had so influenced their development? Conclusion. We now know that the Knights Templar had painstakingly excavated the ruins of Herod's temple, and that the downfall of the order came as the result of accusations of heresy. If the Templars did hold heretical beliefs and conduct strange rituals, it seemed to be a real possibility that these could have originated with a document or documents found by them. Had these 12th century knights uncovered any ancient texts, they would have been in an almost unique position at that time to interpret and appreciate them. Whilst the knights themselves are believed to have been illiterate, their clerics would have been able to read and write in many languages and were famous for their abilities to create and break ciphers. We pursued this avenue as our best guess, unaware that evidence of a Templar find was almost under our noses in the ritual of a Masonic degree that neither of us had joined. So like I said, this whole book is super interesting. The Hiram Key. And there's a lot more that I want to read. There was a lot more that I planned on reading in this book. I found other selections, but I'm not going to read them right now. We can save that for another time if you guys would like. If there's any of these certain books or specific topics that you would like me to dig into more in these videos, comment in the comment section below and let me know what it is that you're wanting to hear more of. Because I only have time, to fit in so much information. The Hiram Key Revisited, that was another book I wanted to get into a little bit of, as well, because it gets into the star families and the connection with the Rosalind Chapel and the Templars, and really how these different families that have influenced society. And it's supposed to be a current which some of these inner circles, they claim to still have blood lineage to Christ and all of these different sorts of things. Some people say St. John the Baptist was supposed to be the real Christ and Jesus was just kind of a figure that came after. There's so many different theories, there's so many different ways of looking at these things. But this book, it's called The Hiram Key Revisited, Freemasonry, A Plan for a New World Order. So it's really kind of teaching you or showing you the agenda of a lot of these different groups and how the world has kind of been crafted in a way. And it's all kind of come down to this moment in history and time right now where everything's at such a pivotal point. It's really interesting to see where the world is going to go, at this point in time. So I'm going to spend the rest of this video mostly talking about what does all of this stuff mean like, how can you take all this information pertaining to the Knights Templars, and how can you actually apply it to your own self and your own character and your own spiritual journey, and where you're going in your own life, and all of these sorts of things. So I have some brief notes here about, I was looking at some Masonic rituals of the Knights Templar, and I wanted to talk about some of the different aspects of the ritual. We're not going to get into all the nuances and details of that, because that's not really what I do, nor is that what I want to do. But I just want to talk about some of the general characteristics of these rituals. And that's really what I seek to do in my book, Freemasonry and Ceremonial High Magic. If you have not already checked that out, make sure you click on my Patreon link, which I'll have in the description of this video. You can also find it in the description of most of my videos. Patreon should be easy to find. It's called Occult Perspectives. And it's only $5 to get access to the first half of my book, or you can spend $10 and get access to the whole book. And you'll also get access to the new chapter when I post the new chapter on there as well. So make sure you go and check that out for sure. I also mentioned in that Knights Templar video, I put a note here. I can't remember which video it was, because there's multiple of those that the Grand Master Hogan talks in. But the Templar ritual, one of the handshakes or the grips which is shown to the candidate during the actual Templar ritual in Freemasonry is the same used by either the Atlanteans themselves or groups and societies which knew about Atlantis. So I thought that was really cool. And actually, while I'm thinking about it, I'm going to show you an illustration or a picture which you've probably seen before. But in case you haven't, I'm going to show it to you now. Okay, so if you've ever seen this depiction, this pyramid right here, the Masonic steps. So down here at the base, you have like your normal 3 degrees, entered apprentice, fellow craft, and master mason. And then there's like Eastern Star and Shriner and other organizations which are depicted in here in the middle, D. Malay, the Rainbow Girls, and all that sort of thing. But on this side, you have York Rite going up the pyramid. Starts here and all the different degrees, which leads to Knights Templar. So there's Knights Templar. And then on this side, this is Scottish Rite. So as you move up the pyramid, it ends in the 33rd degree up there, which the 33rd degree is really an honorary degree. You cannot apply or petition for that degree. Somebody that's already, in the 33rd degree council, they kind of have to come to you and say, hey, we noticed that you have dedicated a lot of time and a lot of energy to either Scottish Rite or society as a whole. So it takes a lot of work and dedication to become a 33rd Freemason, and I think you have to be at least 33 years old, I'm pretty sure, to even obtain that degree. So that's something, they come to you and they kind of tap on your shoulder, and they let you know if that's something that would something that you would be eligible for or not. But you don't come to them and ask them for that. That's something that's gifted, So some of the details of the Masonic ritual. Of course, you're going to have your normal opening of a temple or opening of a lodge, which is very typical of any Masonic or any other group like OTO, Golden Dawn. You have the opening of a ritual, which is where the officers, each officer kind of goes over their part that they play, their role that they play in the temple or the lodge, kind of speak about what their parts are. And then there's usually some ritualistic movements or actions, and then the temple is considered open. So the numbers 3, 7, 9, and 11 played a significant role in the opening, I noticed, of a Templar lodge. A gathering of Knights Templars it's known as an encampment. So instead of just a typical lodge, as in the Blue Lodge degrees, It's an encampment. A Grand Commander is what kind of seems to be the equivalent of the Worshipful Master. So in a general lodge, the Worshipful Master would be the senior presiding officer over the whole degree work. But here it's the Grand Commander is what his title is called. I thought this was a neat line from one of in the ritual. The brilliant rays of the rising sun, shedding their luster upon the banners of our order, may encourage and animate all true and courteous knights and dismay and confound enemies. So it's that idea of the rising sun, that whole archetypal idea of the rising sun we were talking about earlier. You have your typical opening, change of officers, titles, they're adapted from the earlier degrees to be more in alignment with what this ritual's teaching or showing, allegorical wise or biblical story wise. There's interesting references or parts about angles of triangles and divisions. So there's a lot of marching around that takes place. A lot of ritualistic movements. You have knights, so there's swords, and it's very interesting. The energetic sciences and geometric sciences that go into the the makings of these rituals. Before the candidate enters the lodge room, he goes into the chamber of reflection. We've talked about what the chamber of reflection is earlier in this video, and I've talked about it in other videos. Essentially, it's a room you go into to kind of sit with yourself, and you sit with a skull typically, and maybe a candle's lit or something like that, and it's kind of you just sitting with the idea of your own mortality. You are realizing that time is ever flowing and that you don't want to waste your time. You don't want to waste your energies. You want to be really invested in what your life's purpose is. You don't want to get too caught up in a lot of the people seem to get caught up in life, and then they get so swallowed up by it that they are not able to in any way really pursue their true purpose. So lessons of mortality, lessons of reflection, and that time is running short, all of these sorts of things. You have the hourglass symbolism. So after the chamber of reflection, the 7-year symbolic pilgrimage takes place. There is a knighting in the degree, and a very strong theme and sense of protecting the weak, protecting the pilgrims, symbolically, pilgrims, and being able to essentially stand up for those who can't necessarily stand up for themselves or have the strength to in dangerous situations. So really the whole idea of being a knight is being a strong cornerstone foundational aspect of source or creation which can defend those who are in need of it. If you have the strength, if you have the understanding to bring relief, to bring ease to a suffering individual or soul, and you can teach them something about their own, teach them something about themselves through the process, through basically healing, or even if this comes to a physical confrontation where you're having to protect somebody. Like if you're going to be a real man, you have to be able to protect especially if you have, like a woman that you love and care about. You need to be able to protect that. You need to be able to protect the weak, protect the orphans, protect the widows. That's what this is really all about. It's about protecting those who need our protection. If we have that ability, we need to stay strong in our sense of self. At some point in the ceremony, there are 12 tapers or candles in a triangular form. I think they actually show this depiction in a lot of Masonic documentaries. I know on Amazon Prime they used to have 33 and Beyond, I think it's called. That's probably the best mainstream documentary I've ever watched about the Freemasons. That's pretty interesting. There's actually one that's good that's on Netflix too. It's not quite as interesting to watch, but it's very accurate. The knowledge I found in that one as well. But they show this, you'll kind of see like a triangle formed with candles. And this, of course, represented the 12 disciples, the 12 zodiac, or any other symbolism that is related to the number 12. The skull, there's a lot of skull symbolism and mortality symbolism, reminds us to make good use of our time. stay true to our spirit's and soul's purpose so we may rise above once more. We can transcend. We can have that resurrection while we are still alive. The sacrifice of the Savior of the world was made to win or regain the favor of the anger of an offended deity. That's actually a quote that comes from some versions of the ritual, and I thought that was a really weird way of putting it, because if this Yahweh or this Yaldabaoth or this demiurge is kind of like this angry god, or it's a lowercase god, it's not the ultimate source, Christ was sent here to win or regain the favor of this, or basically subdue the anger of this angry storm god. Really strange idea. I thought that was really weird. We talk about the demiurge and the archons and all that a little bit on this YouTube channel. So that's it's not necessarily an evil entity or an evil thing. It's something that plays its role. Definitely, I think really what it has to do is that oftentimes for a lot of us, it brings out or helps us to experience the false self in ways so that we can ultimately come into reconciliation or a true understanding within ourselves that we ultimately have the God source power within ourselves. Like, God is something that exists within. It's not something that we're not under the rule of some external architect or anything like that. It's really a within principle. It's more source exists within. We are essentially the creator. We create our own worlds, as above, so below. As the macrocosm is, so is the microcosm. And they are intricately interwoven. And as you go through the initiatory process, as you're going through your degree works, and as you're going through your magical practices, if you have any sort of spiritual exercises or practices, you are going to obviously just naturally come more into an alignment with the understanding of that. We just hit 2 hours, 11 minutes, and 33 seconds too. That was cool. We are all, symbolically, of course, weary pilgrims on this journey of life, and we all seek refuge, and we must deal with the trials and deceits of this mortal world. But through this journeying, there is still hope. It's like that whole part in The Lord of the Rings where Frodo's like, I don't understand this anymore, Sam. Like, what is the reason for all this? And Samwise, he says, like, because there's something good that's still worth fighting for, Frodo. And I think that's really what they're touching on right here, and that we do all seek to come be able to just relax and be at peace. That's what our souls eventually really want. We want peace. We want the catalyst forces of evolution to push us forward in our evolutionary journey and the universe's evolutionary journey itself, but also we need times of rest. We need places of refuge. That's what's taught by the symbolism of the anchor and arc. And I've done a whole video on that as well in the Master Mason degree. There is symbolism taught appertaining to the sword, of course. The sword corresponds to the element of air, the intellect. And essentially the main theme being that it should only be drawn in the name of defense. And even when an enemy, a quote-unquote enemy, because remember, everything that we perceive as an enemy in the outer existence or experience, it's going to be a reflection of an internal trauma or an internal wound being reflected or shown into the world outside of ourselves. But even when we draw a sword in the name of defense, if we must, and even when our enemy is quote unquote down, the mercy of God can always be given, can always be shown, and there's no need to ever actually use the sword. So it's always in defense. And the Jedis kind of have the same code, we only fight in defense. The word void is used at least 2 times in one version of the ritual. I thought that was kind of interesting too. So the whole idea of the void and the abyss kind of makes its way into these rituals. That whole Da'at type energy, that 11th sphere on the tree of life. Jesus, quote unquote, descended into the place of departed spirits when he died and was resurrected. I thought that was an interesting wording of that. Like, he descended into the place of departed spirits and then he soared or ascended back up. So it's symbolic of the internal death and awakening process. So we die and then we are reborn like a phoenix. My music stopped too. I think that's because, okay, there we go. There was an ad. The darker, quote unquote, darker side of the Knights Templar is represented in the flag symbolism. We were talking about earlier in the hierarchy, half of the flag is white and half of the flag is black. And it's the darkness of when the knights are called to, draw their swords. I'm gonna have to plug this laptop in really quick. So yeah, when the knights are called to, when they go into battle and they channel that raw primal energy, there's probably a lot of demonic type influences. And by demonic, we're talking about the more negative polarity part of self. So within each and every one of us, we have angelic and demonic energetic resonances. And so when you're in battle, when you're that reptilian brain, that R complex is in fight or flight, that is initiating the darker side of the knights. Like, they were vicious in battle, they were, unrelenting, unyielding. That would represent the darker aspect of the knights. And then you have the white, which represents more the purity. We all have the dark and the light within us, so I think that's something that's really important to take into account. And I'm sure, the Knights Templar, I'm sure they were working to some degrees, because they were working on inner gnosis and inner knowledge. They would have had to have worked with darker archetypal forces, possibly even entities such as, they were probably unconsciously or subconsciously working with energies such as Lucifer and Lilith and things of that nature, but maybe they didn't even know it at the time, or maybe they learned some of that stuff from other traditions. It's hard to say. The U.S. flag is important in the ritual too, and because it's made note of a lot. Obviously, it's a powerful talisman that's still effective to this day. There's a lot of power in the American flag and what it represents. There's a lot of star power there. And everyone should read The Secret History of America by Manly P. Hall. He talks about a secret master which kind of just shows up at one of the meetings during the early formation of the country, and somebody just brought a flag to this meeting, and as soon as they try to go and talk to the guy and figure out where he came from or who he was gone. So he was some kind of secret master, which was part of probably a secret brotherhood, maybe possibly like one of the Great White Brotherhood or some other order, which is probably existing in different planes of existence. Like, these are the true hidden masters. Like, they do not make themselves known or seen unless they feel that it's necessary to interfere with the mortal affairs. So check that out. Check that story out. Look into that. The Secret History of America by Manly P. Hall. He goes into that story in The Secret History of the U.S. Flag. There's a lot of interesting things, because when I was a kid and we had to do like the Pledge of Allegiance and all that, I didn't understand the esoteric, mystical component to all this. I didn't understand how much magic and stuff really went into the formation of this country, and that we're really coming from tyranny and all these things, and this truly is the land of freedom. So it's like, the older I get, the more proud I am to really understand what that flag actually represents. It's not just some country bumpkin, like country song type deal. Like, a lot of people just kind of profane what the flag represents. It's a magical talisman, and it has stars, it has pentagrams all over it. So there's a more deeper ritualistic component to all these things that should be taken into account. So I was also reading into the OTO rituals a little bit. There's 3 rituals that have Templar kind of titles to them, and I don't have that pulled up right now. But there were some very interesting things. that I read in those rituals, I would say the Freemasonic rituals are more chivalric and more knight oriented, whereas the OTO rituals are, it's like kind of Crowley kind of puts his own spin or his own interpretation of a lot of these Knights Templar, and they even do mention like Jacques de Molay in there and like the knights being burned at the stake. But the way they go about their rituals are a lot different from like Masonic rituals. So I have visited an OTO temple once. I had a really interesting experience. I went through, I was involved in a Gnostic mass one time. I only went once. And I kind of like got the impression that maybe this is not for me. I have a lot of respect for my OTO, brothers and sisters out there that are a part of that organization, but I have not joined. I am not a member of the OTO, but I do still find it very, very interesting, especially to study. And I would like to speak with more members of the OTO to kind of like pick their brains and learn a little bit more. And maybe it would be something that I get into one of these days. And the OTO itself stands for Ordo Templi Orientis. So that's like the Templar kind of idea is right there in the name. There's a lot of sex magic, and of course with the cup you have the feminine energy and the blade being dripped, or the sword being put into the chalice. That's the masculine and the feminine energies. It's the union of masculine and feminine. There's a lot of sexual type magical information that goes into it, whereas Freemasonry is kind of looking at those energies more from a theoretical standpoint. The OTO actually does involve like some sex magic, and I would be very curious to learn more about it actually, because sex magic is something that is of very high interest to me. I think sex in general, I think some of the highest states of consciousness you can possibly reach is through the sexual act. I think more than anything else, more than any inebriant or a drug or even just normal meditation or normal ceremonial magical practices. Through the sexual act, if you learn how to raise the energy properly, you can have truly mystical visions, but you have to be really careful like who you're sharing that energy with, and that the people who are interested in that kind of stuff, that they've worked through a lot of their own traumas, and they're not just passing those traumas on to you. Because when you share that kind of energy with someone, when you share sexual energy, you're sharing traumas, you're sharing DNA, you're even sharing memories, and you're sharing all of these. Memory doesn't just get stored in the mind, it gets stored in the body. So you're having an energetic transference from one person to another when you're exchanging those sexual energies. So you just have to be really careful about what energies you're taking on when you're sharing that kind of energy with someone, and especially when you're getting involved in like energetic sciences like sex magic and things of that nature. So in the higher degrees of the OTO, the solar energy or the phallic energy is discussed quite a bit. It's emphasized. It says that a lot of their ritual work has to do with that phallic type energy, which if you learn how to channel that energy properly, it is a God force type energy. It's a very powerful type energy. Baphomet plays a super important role, and in the rituals, like they talk about Baphomet quite a bit, and the Grand Master of the OTO themselves is referred to as Baphomet or Baphomet, which I think is very, very interesting. If you look at the OTO symbol itself of the chalice, you'll see kind of the Templar cross above the chalice, and then you can also see the cross swords as well. That whole knighting idea, or the crossing of swords, you see that in like Freemasonry as well. And then something else I noticed too is if you look up, and of course the normal OTO symbol, it's the Vesica Pisces, and the dove symbolism, it's actually a lot of sexual, there's actually a lot of sexual symbolism, some of it not so pretty. I think that Crowley was into some really weird shit. So he's not really, I like to learn from him. I used to read a lot of Crowley's type stuff, but he's not really somebody that I want to, what's the word I'm looking for? You don't really want to duplicate Crowley. You don't really want to try to be like Crowley or imitate or mimic him in any kind of way. I don't think that's really the best idea. But if you look also at the sigil of Lucifer, you've got kind of the same, like, this cup. It's like a grail with those crossed swords. It's the whole like grail idea again. So I find that very interesting with the whole feminine, because it's a downward pointing triangle, which is obviously the cup or the feminine force. And then, but flowing from this downward point, you've got this geometry forming here, which looks like the square and compasses. So is this the portal or the womb of this Luciferian consciousness, which is coming from above this? Because if you study like Jeremiah over at Universal Mastery, you'll learn that Lucifer is not just one being, it's a social memory complex. It's a egregore of different entities or energies which can manifest as one being, and it's kind of an overarching, really one of the overarching spirits of this, our local galaxy. It has a lot to do with our own universe. Once again, as within, so without. I have another interesting article pulled up here that I'm not going to read right now. It's called The Mystery of Baphomet. You should be able to find it online. That's how I have it pulled up here, on phoenixmasonry.org. And it's from, it's written by Jamie Paul Lamb, the guy who wrote the book I was showing you earlier. And it's, let me see how long it is. It's like maybe 4 pages. 3, 4, 5, 6, no, 7, 8, 9, like 9 pages. It's not that long. It's the same guy who wrote this book, Myth, Magic, and Masonry. So definitely worth checking that out. I'm going to go ahead and close that window. I've made it all the way through my notes. I didn't read all of the sections of the hierarchy that I wanted to read from, but like I said, I can read from either one of those hierarchy books in later videos, if you guys would like. There is one last thing that I have pulled up here. It's called Secrets of the Knights Templar Baphomet. I was paging through the Sacred Fire, the story of sex and religion, and came across an illustration entitled the quote-unquote, the quote, Idol of Knights Templar, showing Semitic influences. There's no reason in the text to the picture and no source given for the illustration. However, if it's a genuine drawing from the time of the Inquisition's investigation into the Templars, it could very well be the source of Eliphas Levi's goat-headed hermaphroditic version of Baphomet, the mysterious demon in the Inquisition. The mysterious demon the Inquisition accused the Templars of worshipping. So here's some of the original illustrations that are being shown here. And a lot of the sex stuff, it's going to be alchemical sex symbolism. So they were learning how to utilize the sexual energy and use it in a magical way, essentially. And that's why I want to read that one book that my friend has right now that he's borrowing. I forget what it was called. Was it called The Secrets of the Knights Templar? Anyway, I talked about it earlier in this video. I don't know if I can find that picture again or not, but anyway. So here we have, this is obviously Levi's Baphomet right there. Let me first describe the Templar imagery and then give my reasons for connecting it to Levi's Baphomet. The top half, the crescent moon with face in the top left corner, sun with face in the top right corner, roundish face with, he's talking about these pictures up here, I think, and then he's gonna, So this is going to be some weird stuff. Let's see. Crescent moon with face in top left corner, sun with face in the top right corner, roundish face with penis inserted in top, balls showing bottom left corner, same vase with baby emerging bottom right corner, bird with outstretched wings in the center of the image. Human figure, some of it I can't read, with small wings sitting on top of the bird, its genitals obscured by the bird's head. The human figure has the head of what looks like a sheep to me, no horns at all. The bottom half is divided into two boxes. The right-hand box. So yeah, that was referring to this top picture right here. You can actually see the genitals sticking out of this pot right there now, and then there's a baby on this side. So very interesting, like, imagery there. So in this right picture, so now they're going to be talking, I think they're talking about either this one or this one. A woman with upraised arms, her open robe showing her breasts and a shaved pubic area. On her head is a crown with 3 rectangular segments. Between her feet is a skull. To the left are 6 small stars and a large 5-pointed star. To the right are 6 small stars and a large 6-pointed star. In each hand she holds what looks like a stiff chain running down the length of her body and angled slightly inward. At the end of each chain is a small crescent shape. Left-hand box, another woman, open robe, upraised arms, 3 segmented crown, and stiff chains in her hands, angled inwards, no stars or skull. The Templar revelation cites the fact that Levi in his History of Magic says that the Templars were created by a Gnostic Johannite sect that preserved esoteric secrets and had designs on temporal power. Further, Levi says that before his execution, Jacques de Molay, the last of the official Templar Grandmasters, organized and instituted occult masonry. In other words, Levi thought he knew what was going on with the Templars. This gave him license to smush the above imagery together according to his own other understanding. For the sheep's head, he substituted a goat's head, since the imagery of the top half obviously has a sexual generation theme to it. The wings became bat wings because this is supposed to be a demon. He then moved up elements from the lower half. The 5-pointed star is placed on the goat's head. The exposed breasts are placed on the naked body of an indeterminate sex. The obscured genitals are replaced with the caduceus, which derives from the interweaving of the links in the chain, like instruments being held by the open-robed woman. Later on, chains are added to the tarot card of the devil based on what look like chains in this original image. So Levi's iconography says something like sexuality enslaves men and women, but it can be transmuted into a healing force by a proper interweaving of male and female elements. So there's the secret right there. I don't know whether he was referring to an inner alchemy or to physical, ritual sex, but what does the Templar imagery actually stand for? Given the crown and the stars, I suspected that the open-robed women were images of the Queen of Heaven, obviously not the Virgin Mary, but an earlier incarnation, perhaps Isis, or maybe the Scarlet Woman, the Scarlet Woman or the Whore of Babylon? And that's actually another video subject that I've been wanting to get into and cover. I had the intuition that the key to understanding was the instrument of interwoven links that she carried in her hands. These were obviously not chains, since they didn't fall like chains. They were stiff and angled inward, but what were they? They looked vaguely Egyptian to me. I thumbed through a book on Egyptian mythology, but didn't find any hieroglyph or scripture that fit that image. And then here's an image from an old Egyptian urn. Looks like they're worshiping almost like some kind of like phallic type thing right there. It's interesting. Got like lion symbolism. I don't know if this is representing, he's even holding like a club or a phallic type thing. I don't know if this represents like the overcoming of the sexual passions to transmute it into pure potential. The answer came while I was again thumbing through the sacred fire. On page 44, there's an illustration entitled From an Old Egyptian Urn. On the right, it shows a man with a club fighting a lioness. On the left, it shows a kneeling man worshiping a cartouche. I don't know what that word is. Cart, as in C-A-R-T, O-U-C-H-E, like oval. Within the oval is a penis, and rising above it is an interwoven chain-like object. Outside the oval is another interwoven chain-like object with 3 sinuous links. The Templar images show objects with 11 and 12 links, but the similarities between the Egyptian and Templar objects are clear. So if B.Z. Goldberg, the author of The Sacred Fire, is not doodling away out of his own imagination, it looks very much as if the Templars were secretly into worshipping a naked Queen of Heaven figure with Egyptian roots, and that this worship had something to do with sexual sublimation, an appropriate practice for a band of celibate warrior monks, because those guys weren't, most of them were probably not involved in the sexual act, so they had to connect with that divine feminine. They had to connect with their own divine feminine through different ritualistic practices and learning how to properly assimilate and work with the sexual energies. In keeping with the Egyptian theme, I wondered if the sheep-headed figure was the Ba, the soul, the source of life-desiring sexual energy, since sheep say Ba. Interesting. Similarly, birds say Ka, so the bird that carries the naked sheep-headed figure on its back might be the Ka. Birds get a panoramic overview when they fly and have very sharp eyesight, hence they are symbols of consciousness and discrimination. So it's being able to soar above the material realm, so to speak, and have a higher perspective on things. Could the upper image be the fusion of the Ba and the Ka, sexuality now winged, being carried aloft by discriminating consciousness? The body is naked, but we can no longer tell its sex. The head of the bird replaces its genitals. Very interesting. So I thought that was a good thing to go ahead and read as well, because I think that gives a lot more secret type of insight into what the Baphomet, actually is. So I think with all of that being said, of course there's more I could go on about. I could go into those books a little bit more, but I think I am going to go ahead and end the video. I'm trying to think if there's any last things that I wanted to add into the video, but I think that pretty much covers it. So yeah, this was a much longer video, and I hope that you were able to maybe make it through the whole video and appreciate the information that has been presented herein today, and I hope you learned something from this. If you did get some value out of this video, please make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you like the video. Make sure you ring the notification bell if you want to be notified of new content. And be sure to go and check out my Patreon over at Occult Perspectives is the name of the Patreon. You can click on the link in the description of this video. I also have the link in the description of other videos as well. So yeah, with that being said, I think I am going to go ahead and wrap up this video. And I want to thank each and every one of you for being a part of this journey with me. And I will hopefully see you all very, very soon. So peace and blessings until next time, wherever you are, day or night. And may you find happiness and bliss in your spiritual travels, my friend. Peace and blessings. And until next time.